Greetings! It is I, Tentus Naravan Dracovin, your Lord and Emperor here at the Dracovin Empire, and welcome, of course, once more to the Breach. We are going to be talking about the World of Darkness today, and not just anything in the World of Darkness, but everything. Today I took on a very difficult task to help all of you out there to dive into what the hell is out there in the World of Darkness. We've talked about werewolf, we've talked about vampire, we've talked about mage, heck, I've even talked about hunter a little bit. But all of these combined are only a little fraction of the World of Darkness. And a lot of these, honestly, are difficult to break down what I can play in them. Because there are a lot of options. There have been a lot of books that have shown off the various different things you can play, and the terms and tasks. It just is an exuberant mess of everything. So, trying to break it down was a challenge that I've been kind of looking over. And breaking that down has come up with me of a number of rules to this entire thing. That's kind of what I broke down. A number of rules. So, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be diving into the storyteller system. The storyteller system and most of the storyteller system. Now, there are other games that use the storyteller system. What is the storyteller system? It is the D10 system that World of Darkness, Vampire the Masquerade, and all those games use. It is the basic system. I've talked about how a werewolf and a vampire and a mage can play in the same game. The base characters aren't of the same power level. That I've certainly mentioned. Yes, cool. A very clever mage could take out a werewolf or a vampire. But they would have to have the right abilities for a beginning character and come up with a really good plan and do a bunch of dice rolls successfully. But in general, starting mage versus werewolf, werewolf wins 99% of the time. Vampire, a little less time, but vampire can absorb a lot more problems. Still, vampire's in the middle. Comparing those three, that's the thing. Werewolf just murders a lot of stuff. It is a combat system more than others. But, anyway, the storyteller system has had a number of additions over the years and other games that it's connected to. The Trinity universe of games, especially the new versions of them that have been put out by our good friends over at Onyx Path. Exalted and Scion were two of them. All of the Chronicles of Darkness games, which I'm not going to be talking about, and a few other systems have used Storyteller. The revised Storyteller system is what a lot of them have used. We're talking the basic history of the main Storyteller system, which came through 1st edition, 2nd edition, the revised editions, 20th anniversary, and into the 5th edition games, which are Vampire 5th edition, the new version of Werewolf, and all that kind of stuff. I'm keeping it down to anything that is called World of Darkness. So I'm combining those two things to define what we have. World of Darkness has to be from the original set of games, and it has to be still your basic storyteller system. And there are a lot of choices from that. So let's just begin by throwing me over the corner, and I'm just going to use me over here. Boop. Hey, me. This should put us up the vampire book. I'm going to throw this here for you to see as I talk about each of these. Because I'm going to talk about each of these in a... not an order, but I'm going to use them as a backdrop to talk about what I could play and the different versions of the games. So Vampire the Masquerade has, honestly, 3 versions that have came into existence you could play in. Now, what does that mean? No, I'm not talking about editions. I'm talking about versions right now. That's the first place we're going to start talking about this. Because certainly there are a bunch of versions. This is the 2nd edition book. There's the revised edition, the V20 book, the 5th edition book. What I mean is, there was Vampire Dark Ages, Vampire Victorian Age, and of course the core Vampire Masquerade. Those were the first thing, different time periods I could play. And are these different things I could play? No and yes. Certainly, I'm still playing a vampire as a vampire as a vampire, and the rules are basically going to be the same. But looking at this, playing a Dark Age vampire is going to be a lot different than playing a Victorian Age vampire, which is a lot different than playing a Modern Age vampire. That's an important thing that you kind of have to separate out here when talking about these. Now, that's the first thing I want to kind of mention, that each of these takes place in a different area. Victorian Age is, of course, got a lot of kind of that, a little bit of those modern tropes kind of bringing in there. It's usually from the 1880s to 1897 is kind of that time period, so it's in that late 1800s. Dark Ages find themselves, if we're looking at the time period that that's taking place in, it's traditionally around 1230 is kind of in that area they kind of aim for. So that's when the main scenarios take place for there. That's when the revised edition kind of takes place, and they aim for it. The other editions float around there. Okay, we got our time periods. What can we play? Of course, when we're talking vampire, you can play a vampire. I mean, that is the first and foremost thing that you think about when I talk about playing a vampire. Well, in Vampire the Masquerade, it's a vampire. I mean, it's the unfortunate obvious nature of it that also makes it a little difficult to talk about, because Vampire introduces a couple of other things in their systems that I can point out very easily that you could play. It's just that it's kind of hard to find them all, because there are more things you can play. You can certainly play a vampire, in which vampires break down into certain groups. I can play a traditional vampire, which is just the basic character you start out with. You could play an elder. It's just playing a vampire with some more points to build your basic character with. That's pretty much it. I could play a thin blood. It's an option that you have that is using some flaws traditionally to make yourself a little bit weaker but have a little bit more oomph to it. What else could I play? I could play ghoul. Now we're getting into something a little more interesting here. What is a ghoul? I've talked about it before, but a ghoul is basically a mortal that has reached a sort of immortality because they can constantly imbibe vampire's blood. They're traditionally blood bonded to the vampire which created them, because they drink blood enough times from them. Some ghouls get away with this by taking blood from different vampires here and there. That's a thing that could be for character creation, is not being blood bonded and getting it from various other sources, but they need vampire blood to survive, because if you're older than what a natural human would be, you quickly basically age and die after a period of time, if you don't get vampire blood. Otherwise, it sustains you, basically. You drink blood from a vampire. You're not actually a vampire. You're still alive. But that'd be a very interesting character to play, though. That's the thing is, I've already brought in a difference here by going in this here. We are playing something that is outside the purview of the normal things you'd provide. And granted, I'm going to tell you this big thing here about the entire thing about playing a ghoul. It is talked about in the books very easily, playing a ghoul. I could play a mortal. Now, when I say mortal, do I mean a human? Yes. But playing a mortal in a Vampire the Masquerade world is different than playing a human in another system. There are very obvious reasons for this, but it comes down to not character creation, but the way that they're presented in each of the books. So playing a mortal in Vampire the Masquerade usually involves a good old series of ability is referred to as true faith. Well, you can play basically a human. Why would I play a human? They're mortal hunters. They're different than Hunter the Requiem hunters. Usually they have their truth faith ability and know about things and have other abilities, but they're traditionally not supernaturally imbued mortals. And playing one has its ways of doing things. It's just certainly you could do things like being members of a Inquisition, or there's things like Demon Hunter X, Project Twilight in Werewolf the Apocalypse. I'll talk about more of these in as I go. So yes, Demon Hunter X. It's a World of Darkness source book. I can talk about this one here because it's more than just general World of Darkness, but it's a group that fight against supernatural things. Some of them have abilities. It's a book from, what's the date from here? I'm not going to throw it to it, but it's a book that shows off a lot of things. And certainly, like, if we're talking about the Second Inquisition in Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition, in the way that they do it. I don't like the way they do it, though, but that's just me personally. But if you're just looking at that, you could do characters related to that. So there are mortal hunters or just playing an immortal in World of Darkness. There are extensions on Vampire the Masquerade. Let me spell this correctly, because if I don't, it'll be terrible. I spelled it wrong. Kindred of the East book. Let's look up an image of the Kindred of the East book, because I was going to throw that up here, because that's one I can talk about quickly here. Kindred of the East book. That's a good image of it. No, it's a terrible image of it. Well, you know, I try. Anyway. Kindred of the East book. We'll throw this up for a second here. It's not a very good image of it, but here is an image of the front cover of the Kindred of the East book. The Kuai Jin. The Eastern Vampires. They're technically not vampires like we look at them in the traditional Vampire the Masquerade, but they have their own set of rules and character guidelines, and you could play a Kuai Jin. There are rules for it. You're something different. You are vampiric in a way, but you could play one, and you could take a look at playing one. For vampires, even if we go back there, you can be from places other than, you know, your European kindred Sabbat kind of set of guidelines. There are others that you can kind of dive into. Things like being from Africa, for being the Libans of Africa, which have a different mindset completely. There are other groups and other places in the world that have other mindsets that you could kind of dive into and kind of look at these. So, there's a lot you could play here. From your average mortal to your ghouls to your Kuai Jin. And it all throws a huge group of things to do. Of course, there are some things that you can't play. Creatures and things that are introduced in this world that they aren't really options. But there are some other things that we can still talk about when we're talking Vampire the Masquerade. You can't play a zombie. There are things that are created by, like, things like the Cappadocians, the Zombu. They're basically zombies, but you can't really play one. I'm going to take a drink here. Damphir and the Quasian version of Dampire. Hey, they're a thing that exists. What are they? It is a basically like half vampire. Now we can talk about versions of things. The idea of a Damphir kind of exists in the versions that exist in World of Darkness. Ghouls have a derivative of them you could play, a Revenant. What's a Revenant? Well, we should start with that, probably. Revenant is you're hereditarily a ghoul. You can generate a little bit of vitae within your own veins. Basically, vampire blood. So we talked about playing a ghoul. You can play a Revenant. You were born a ghoul because your parents were both ghouls. You're inborn with that ability. It takes a lot of generations of breeding ghouls together, basically, to create them, and traditionally Revenants are part of a family. But because of that, you're still immortal, but you have the ability to produce some vampire blood in your body. The Simiche traditionally has created Revenant families, but this idea that they exist, sometimes they still do. They are less a thing, though. Dampirs, on the other hand, are weird. So, they're the half-vampire, product of human and vampire heritage. Again, there is a Quasian version of it we'll talk about. It's supposed to be impossible, but in the final nights, they came into being kind of thing. So the rules for character creation for them. But let's kind of talk about how they exist. Because kindred, full-blooded ones don't have sexual potency. Okay. If you're embraced as someone that's it's like a pregnant female is embraced, it's usually an immediate miscarriage. Ghouls can become pregnant. Hey, we talked about that. But then we get sort of talking towards a Revenant. That's why I wanted to mention those. Thin-blooded. I mentioned thin-blooded. The 15th generation. Some of them can be fertile. And that's where a Damphir comes about in. The Thin Bloods. They have their own rules. Their thing. You can be a Damphir. You're the child of a Thin Blood that was fertile. There are children of Quasian too. The Shadewalkers, the Twilight Children, the Dampires. They have some regional terms there. There's, they're rare. There's only 1,000 active within the areas, what we call the Middle Kingdom. There's rules for it. It is, again, like playing a Damphir. Dampires is their own thing. Okay, cool. And there is also, kind of in Vampire the Masquerade, which there really isn't rules to play one, but they exist, are liches. Hey, is that a D&D term? Yeah. But within the True Black Hand, the Talmahera, there are those evil mortal mages, best described as evil because, you know, they're just terrible people, that swarm them to the cases, and they kind of have been transformed into a version of immortality. There's only 3 of them at a time. They're sort of a ritual which changes them almost into vampires, but they're like mage vampires. It kind of, like, their true spark of magic is kind of eliminated, but their knowledge over magic exists. It's a weird kind of juxtaposition that it, like, allows them to form a version. It's strange. It's something you're going to play, but it's a thing that's out there. But we want to really talk about more things you can play here today, but I wanted to mention them. Let's move on from Vampire, because I think we've hit most of the stuff in Vampire. And the Kindred of the East here. Let's go to Werewolf, because there's a bunch of stuff in Werewolf to talk about. And we can talk about the first thing in Werewolf, of course, is werewolves. You can play werewolf. You are either born of a wolf or born of a human, and one of your ancestors, usually your parent, but sometimes deeper in your ancestry, was a werewolf, a creature of Gaia, created by the spirit of all of the earth. Not to be God, that feels like I was just doing a Captain Planet reference there, and it feels like it because there is a little bit of that kind of entire flavor in the entire thing, but no. The idea is that, yes, you are a creature that was created by this cosmic energy of Earth. You look after it, Gaia. You deal with the forces of the Triad, the Weaver, the Wild, the Worm. And, yeah, Werewolf is pretty standard. You're a very more physical melee combat kind of thing, but there are spiritual adventures that can be had, diving into spiritualism, dealing with unusual things that are in the spirit world even. So there is more than just stabby, stabby, kill, 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 but that's a lot of it. But, well, there is, of course, the werewolves there is the other changing breeds. Okay, wow, now we're getting into it. Now, I'm not going to go for the full list of changing breeds, because there are the contemporary ones and the non-contemporary ones. And bringing it back for just a second, because I can't forget to mention it, there are also 2 other time period versions of werewolf. Remember, we talked about at the beginning of Vampire. I can't forget to talk about this before we talk about the changing breeds. There's Dark Ages werewolf. Okay, it's very similar to Dark Ages Vampire, of course, same time period, but it is, of course, dealing with a time period there. The tribes usually in Europe. But we also have Wild West werewolf. Werewolf the Wild West is a very Savage West game. And very kind of strange. It's a very niche genre, I'd have to say, but probably a fun one to play with. So yeah, there are those 2, which I do have to throw out there and mention because they're important to do so. Anyway, I was going to talk about the changing breeds. Let's kind of go over a general list of the 9 changing breeds you can normally play. Of the changing breeds you can normally play. The Farah, the shapeshifters. So the thing about that is, yeah, there are more out there, but most of these a lot of them are extinct or older materials or things like that, but I will go over these very basically, just because they are options. And I'm not going to talk about ones that exist too much. There's the Ajaba, the were hyenas. They are contemporary, based mostly out of Africa. The Anasazi, the were spiders. The only remaining of the insect type changing breeds because they ate all the rest of them. They're technically not children of Gaia. They're children of the Queen Anastasia, a spirit child of the Weaver. They are very alien and different. The Apis, the were-aurochs, basically were-cows, driven extinct during the Garou by the Garou in the War of Rage. The Basset, the were-cats. Yep. They are basically descendant from various species of wildcats. Another one which is theoretically extinct. They weren't wiped out during the War of Rage. Only a few survive today. Basically, they came into South America, where the Camazots, the werebats, when the Spanish arrived, they basically did a lot of damage to them. So there aren't a lot left. The Korvax, the were-ravens, they survived the War of Rage by aiding the Garou. And they maintain the best relationships with werewolves and all the other Fera. The Korvax are basically messengers, but were-ravens are there. Another one that is extinct is the Grondor, the wereboars. Again, Garou, War of Rage. The Gruul, the werebears. They were believed to be extinct, killed during the War of Rage. And the thing is, though, they basically went into like a special kind of hibernation and have woken the modern age. So the Gruul actually do exist. There are a branch of werewolves native to Japan that went into isolation. The Haken. God, I'm going to butcher some of these, definitely. Of any of I butcher, sorry. Nose blown. They're pretty much very similar to Garou, but they have some differences. The Kitsune, the werefoxes, they are basically Asian shapeshifters. That's where they originate from, the Asian countries. They're part of the Beast Courts in the Middle Kingdom, so they deal with a lot of the stuff that goes on there. Very different than the more North American / European-based changing breeds, even the African ones. The Mokele, they are normally called were-crocodiles, but they are also from the Age of the Dragon Kings. They're basically one of the oldest changing breeds. They have knowledge of that. Though they are more crocodilian now, they're Krynos forms. They're basically in between forms, can take on the form of dinosaurs and dragons. So they are sometimes called were-dragons or were-dinosaurs even. The idea is that though modern day they are very were-reptilian, they do deal with having connections to the ancient ancient reptilian or reptilian-based creatures of the past. Therefore, dragons and dinosaurs and stuff. The Naga, the were-snakes. They are believed to be extinct, though only it's thought that maybe some of them are remaining in India, where they came from. Basically, the beast courts in Asia know what was going on with them. The Nuisha, the were coyotes, exist. They don't have any rage because they pulled a prank on Luna. Closer fitting to the Umbra than any other Fera. So, interesting one there. The Ratkin, the were-rats. They watched over humanity. The Garou have basically taken over their role, and the Ratkin kind of hate them ever since. So, yeah. And, of course, the Rokia, the were-sharks, protectors of the sea. And there you go. Those are the basics that you can kind of look at. There are some others. The insect races, of course, I've mentioned, which went extinct during the insect wars. Yeah. The Age of Kings had, of course, the arachnids, the sharks, the dinosaurs, and all that kind of things, where the Age of Mokele came after. There were supposed to be other ones there. There are other groups that were mentioned that were slaughtered during the War of the Rage we don't know about. Whether they're true or joking, it's hard to say. There were even things like there's were-saber-tooths that were one of the tribes of the Beset that are extinct. So yeah. Some freshwater fish shapeshifters that went extinct during the War of Rage. Things like that, where falcons, where otters, where eagles. Yeah. There was the sapient shape-shifting orangutans that the beast courts take of. And there are the mockery breeds. Now we can talk about the mockery breeds. Why, yes, the mockery breeds are a part of this entire thing. But basically, Project Lycion by Pentex, which we're going to talk about Pentex. Oh, we can also talk about the Fallen breeds, which you can technically play if you wanted to play a basically worm-tainted game. You can play Black Spiral Dancers. They're a group of werewolves that fall into the worm and are corrupted, but also you can play the Skull Pigs. Remember the Gruul? Hey, they fell to the worm. All of them are there now. So, I used, in Legacies of Kain, if you shout out to that game, a Samasa, a were-cockroach. Basically, cockroach shapeshifter, kind of, that was a combination. It was a mockery beat. The Ananura are frog shapeshifters that were created that way. Karase, rhinoceros shapeshifters created by Pentex's group. Werewolves were basically mindless Garu that hungered for them. And Yaren, the ape shapeshifters. Certainly plenty of those you could play, not the werewolves. The werewolves you couldn't, but you could play the other ones. And you could play Black Spiral Dancer game, or like play Skull Pigs or something like that if you want to play like a worm game. It's not impossible to play basically the more villainous kind of creatures or characters. So certainly you could play a mockery breed other than just the Pharaoh. So we've kind of hit on a lot that you could play here in this entire thing. Is this everything you could do? No, it's not. We have more to talk about in Werewolf to play. Yeah, we haven't finished yet. We can play more in Werewolf the Apocalypse than just werewolves, the Pharaoh breeds, the other changing breeds, the mockery breeds, or honestly those that are corrupted to the worm. I could play Kinfolk. Well, not Kinfolk. I think it's Kinfolk. I could play someone related to a werewolf. I haven't awakened as one, or another changing breed, but you could play them. Those that are aware of werewolves and know of their bloodline can learn gifts. The basically supernatural abilities of werewolves. Just like we're talking about vampires and ghouls, you could play a game of all near mortals who have unlocked a number of gifts, number of supernatural abilities, because they have it strongly in their bloodline. Can you possibly awaken as a changing breed? Maybe still, or maybe not. You might never awaken. It might just be something that's now in your bloodline. And whether or not you tell your children or anything like that, whether they pierce the veil, that's an entirely another thing. But you can play Kinfolk, you know? So Kinfolk, though, take the form of... Traditionally, when you play Kinfolk, you play humans. But Kinfolk can also be wild animals. They're not... These are the ones not prone to delirium. They're not actual shapeshifters themselves. You know, there are Kinfolk gifts. But traditionally, Kinfolk, whether they are, let's say for werewolf, whether they are wolves or humans, they're those that can, you know, carry the blood of werewolves, and therefore can have those children possibility, or are related to them. If I'm Kinfolk, I could have a brother who's a werewolf, you know? That's a choice. So I could certainly play one, you know? Again, you know, it's a different kind of thing completely. Also, let's talk about something that is here, that is part of this entire thing of Kinfolk. but it's a little different because now I've already talked about mortals a number of times. I talked about true faith. Cool, great. True faith is not the only one, and we can talk about a little bit one because I'm honestly remembering them, and welcome. There are also other Numia. What are Numia? Humans. You're humans. That's the basic thing. You're basically humans, but with other abilities. We talked about true faith, that could be a build for playing a mortal. There's also hedge magic and psychic phenomena. Those are the three categories of Numia, which are types of characters that are basically new humans. Sometimes you might have more than one. That's very rare. But, like, it's dealing not with the deeper levels. Like, hedge magic is like it's a supernatural ability. It's different than the magic that mages and mage weapons. Psychic phenomena, there are psychics out there. And the true faith people, where they have such a powerful faith that it basically creates supernatural effects. Regardless of that. Those are characters you could play, people that are dealing with that kind of things. You're doing mystical abilities, but it also, a lot of these basically mess with your mental health a lot because you're just mortals with those abilities. It's not like your actual kinfolk. So, hello everybody, welcome. Nice to pop in and enjoy learning about World of Darkness things. We're talking werewolves right now in the World of Darkness stuff. So, what else can I play? If I've now talked about, for werewolf, the apocalypse here. I've talked about werewolves. I've talked about changing breeds. I've talked about being kinfolk or other mortal. Black Spiral Dancers are not the only corrupted by the worm you could play. Not by the long shot. Because, honestly speaking, we also have Project Twilight. I can't forget those. That's the hunting side of specifically hunting more werewolves and Garu and possibly Kindred. It is a technically supposed to be a secret group in the government to secretly hunt and study Garu Kindred. Guess what? There was stuff in the government before the frickin' Second Inquisition, so Project Twilight already technically existed and was also very secretive and wasn't so stupid. I'm sorry. I'm just a little annoyed about that. Anyway. Anyway, we have more. Fomori. Fomori are a big one. It'd be like SCP for the World of Darkness. That's a great way of saying it. It was a secret task within the government, and it gets stupider when you get to Vampire 5th Edition. I just feel like there's a lot of things that you have to dismiss mentally when it comes to the Second Inquisition in Vampire 5th Edition, that you have to say, like, that has to coincidentally happen for this to be where things get. It has to... There's a lot of disbelief in if you actually think about it deeply. That's the way I'm going to put it. Anyway, you can play under Pentex. What's Pentex? Pentex is the evil corporation, and it very much so is an evil corporation, that has sworn allegiance to the worm, the cosmic being which wants to destroy and decay all of reality. They're a corporation that's like, that's a great idea. Why does Pentex do that? I don't know. It's tainted by the worm, basically. It's so weird that, like, a corporation can become... and it was an oil and mining company, so they weren't great things, but basically taken over by the spirits of things. So, certainly Banes, Black Spiral Dancers, and Fomori are there. Banes are evil spirits. You can't really play an EV spirit. The cosmic being. The CEO is probably an actual person, but it's controlled by the cosmic being. Is the best way to describe it. I don't know what the current CEO is. Probably just worm tainted. Basically someone that was infested by like a Bane spirit and became a horrible creature that hides as a man and now just, does bad things. So yeah. Huh. Oh, God. They have a vampire on the Horde board of directors, too. Just whatever. Pentex is a just interesting thing there. Effectively, though, if you are joining with Pentex, you're probably not going to be playing a person, a human. Certainly, playing a Black Spiral Dancer is a big thing there. But what you're going to normally play is a Fomori. There are rules for playing a Fomori. What is a Fomori? Well, you are possessed by and aligned to the worm. Effectively, the Bane, those horrible evil worm spirits, has basically corrupted your mind, body, and spirit. Usually human or animal is done that. There are various types of Fomori out there, but you could play one. There are rules for playing one. I will always remember a friend of mine who played a Fomori, and they are horribly corrupted in such a way that he had to consume the flesh of others to survive. So it was kind of like the one group of vampires that have to do it, except he's just a random person, and he fed on the homeless. So that was his idea for Fomori that was broken away from Pendex, but still had to survive. So we somehow dealt with that character in our group. We were a group of different beings. It was an interesting group. Not a great one. But you can play Fomori. Yeah, and there are different groups of Fomori. Traditional types of them depend on what you infect. Some of them are things like an infected vampire is a bloodworm, a psychic is a brain eater, infected by a bane of lust makes you enticer. The Ferrotoi are the Bane children, the princes of the Fomori. The Freak Feet are basically the basic creation, and the Hollow Men are the oldest version of them. There's also Bane-infected horses that were used by the Black Spiral Dancers that I'm not going to try to pronounce that name for. But I think the Freak Feet are traditionally the ones you'd probably play. The Freak Legion. That's traditional ones you play. So Freak Legion was a book that you could use. But yeah, there you go. That kind of hits up most of what you can play when it comes to Werewolf the Apocalypse. I can't forget an important one that comes out here with Werewolf the Apocalypse. I really can't. I can't, because there's another one right here that I should talk about, which is a big one that exists. Abominations. Certainly, you could play an abomination. Are they rare? Hell yeah. But they are a thing you can play. As stolen by what was that movie series that took that referenced it? God, I've forgotten the movie series, but it was a movie series, and they mentioned it in popular media, and they're like, an abomination. It's a werewolf vampire, or a changing breed vampire. It's rare that one survives becoming a vampire. Basically, a Pharaoh, a changing breed, whether it's a werewolf or another type of changing breed, is attempted to transform into a vampire. They're highly allergic to the vampire blood. It's very deadly to them. So most just die. But some survive. And basically are the best of both worlds in a very horrible way. Because those that don't die, most of them honestly want to kill themselves too, because they're an abomination or an anathema to their own belief systems a lot of times. Yeah. Garo ones are the most common, but there are others that exist out there. Corvex and Mokale can't be changed into it. Beset Gruul could be changed. Nuisha always die from it. Anasazi are immune because they're got blood abilities. The Kamazot couldn't have been turned. The Grondor would not be turned. Kitsune are blessed, but they kind of like burst of flame. Ratkin can be embraced. But the only problem with Ratkin is they rot like ordinary corpses. So really, Gyaro are the only ones that can really survive. Beset constantly lose Gnosis. Yeah. So really, Gyaro are the main ones. And they're the only ones that can really kind of survive. Some of the other changing breeds can. But you can play abominations. You are vampire werewolves. You have the vampire abilities. You have the werewolf abilities. And you are harder to kill in ways. You know, they still can't regenerate. They can still shift forms. They don't regenerate because they have to use blood points to heal. But they remember all the gifts and rights they possessed before the Embrace. And they can learn worm rights and new rights from Banes. You can't increase your Gnosis, but you can get Rage and blood points and stuff like that. And you can learn disciplines from your clan. So. But they can't Embrace, though. That's an important one. And they get a new trait called Ego. So there are rules for playing a abomination. And there are a number of unknown ones. There's in fact one known Mokale abomination, but it was created by a 3rd gen, an antediluvian. Sobek, a Mokale one. So he's unique, as most of them just die. The Mokale ones go into mindless rage. Sobek did not. It was basically a very powerful vampire that are, you know, there's only like 13 of them, but less now. So those powerful vampires can do crazy shit because their powers basically manipulate reality in a way. I can get into it, but abominations. It's an option. There are more to talk about. Let's talk about mages, because honestly, we can talk mages. Boop! Mage the Ascension is next on our list to talk about. Hi, Mage. Welcome. We talked about playing a mage, and I've talked about it a few times now, but you play someone who has the ability to manipulate reality. Reality doesn't really like that. But, you know, Mage Ascension's the modern mage. There are a couple of books that existed in previous ages. There was a Dark Ages mage, where, guess what? In the Dark Ages, Paradox is not really in existence, but there is a backlash for failing to cast a spell properly. So, as long as you cast a spell properly, in Dark Ages Mage, you can use magic at will. Paradox doesn't exist. People just are like, it's magic, we believe in it. You know, that's the way that people worked. So, it's a different kind of age, the medieval age. It's a different kind of play style. Certainly vastly different from modern Mage the Ascension. If I would play Dark Ages, I'm playing it very differently. Now, there is another historical one, Mage the Sorcerer's Crusade, which is set basically during the Renaissance, where things are changing a lot during that time period. There is a little bit more changes in the way that people believe things and stuff like that. The cosmology has changed. There's new factions. There's a lot more differences in the way that the game is played, but it's another one that you could look into. Again, it's all about powers of belief and stuff, but this is an era where religion and science are competing a lot more during the Renaissance. The mindscape of humanity is changing, certainly. So the supernatural belief in things has altered drastically. Now, when it comes to playing in Mage, the easiest thing to play is, of course, the traditions. There are a lot of factions, though. The traditions are the basic one. The traditions are the ones that have been in existence since the beginning, and most of the books follow them. When I was going over the V20 book, or the M20, book, the 20th Anniversary Mage book, I was talking about that there are 3 groups that are mentioned there. But the traditions are the ones that were introduced in most of the core books before then. The other groups were introduced afterwards. They are the basically paragram of, if I'm going to play a mage, most of the time you play a tradition. They're also the technocracy. They're basically people that are, hey, mage is bad, things that destroy reality bad. We kind of alter reality scientifically, but we're trying to enforce the reality. They're enforcers of reality and believe kind of this combination of magic technology that exists. Their technology is basically magic-based, but they believe it to be more science-based and are tapping into powers that are beyond that. There are the crafts, which are kind of more independent mages from these groups. That's the best way to describe the crafts. There are groups that are out on their own that you could play any of those. They're kind of like the lower bloodlines rather than the clans in Vampire the Masquerade. I didn't even talk about clans and bloodlines. I've talked about those in plenty of my videos before, but that's one of those things, the clans, the bloodlines, all that stuff. It's similar here. The traditions, the crafts, the tribes of werewolves. Of course, the Nefandi were mentioned, which are a sect of what Carcom was called fallen mages and have their own kind of representative play. And there's also the Marauders and the Orphans, which we can talk about here briefly. If you want to look into, of course, the technocracy, the Nefandi, and the traditions, the M20 book has them. The crafts are, you could look into each individual ones. They're still basically like playing any of the other ones. It's just different versions of it. The Marauders, probably not going to play them. They're basically insane. They have a form of madness to them. A permanent quiet that they're existing in. Similar to where vampires have those that are not adopted into a formal clan and stuff. There's the Orphans, which are groups of mages that aren't part of a specific group you can be part of. So this is kind of the basics of mage that you get into. And I'm going to tell you here, I'm not as good on all the stuff in mage, you know. So I'm hopefully going to get all of the things to talk about in mage here, but there might be a few that I will be missing here. So I'm just warning you that I'm going to try my best to get all of these. So there is some other groups. The question of whether you can play them or not. I don't think you can play things like the Anakim, which are mages that have merged with psychomp spirits. So, you know, I've changed type of creature. Familiars exist. So there's a lot of types of them. You can't really play a familiar. You can have one either if you're a technomancer. There's technomancer equivalents, constructs, or companions. But they're little creatures that go with you. We talked about... we can talk about now that we've talked about the 3 big ones. Inquisitors. They're a group of humans. Hey, Inquisitors have existed in various forms. So the Second Inquisition isn't a necessary just thing on its own. The idea of an Inquisitor, it exists. Whether you play one or not, it's kind of like weird. That's certainly a thing. Oracles. That's a hard one to play because they're supposed to be people that have ascended. Basically, remember Mage, it's Mage the Ascension. Why? Because most of the time, the traditions, the people you're playing, are trying to do one thing. Ascend. Basically come to a kind of higher level of reality, that they transcend their physical bodies in a way, or find a connection to the spiritual realm or the magical realm, that they understand the existence of reality in a lot of way and can much more go to it. The idea of an oracle is someone that has either ascended or just stopped short of ascension to help life on Earth. So they're very mythological. Playing one would be very difficult. It's like the vampire has the state of Golconda, which is basically like ultimate or Kokunda, which is ultimate understanding and existing and basically controlling the beast within you. It's a similar kind of thing. Hard to kind of get into something like that you can play. There are, not to be confused with Lich, the Liche, which are there's a ritual that you can become one. It's basically, it's achieving immortality. It's different than the Lich, which I talked about, which were connected to vampire. This is one that probably players could get into, but it is a different kind of thing. It's a type of immortality through mages. So it's basically the word Lich with an E at the end. The thing about mage is that when we talk about mage, we kind of hit on all of the groups being what you can play. Because unlike a lot of the other groups, the werewolf and vampire stuff, those are very supernatural based, so you can have various different versions of them. Mage is a mage is a mage. Now, a hedge mage is very different. Hedge magic is very different than it's sorcery. So I talked about that. It's a form of magic used by non-mage mortals. So it is a magic. It's not the true magic of an awakened or an enlightened. It's a basic type of sorcery, and that's why I can talk about it, but I should really kind of differentiate it there. It's kind of off to the side of a thing there. So again, it's different than psychic abilities. It's a thing there. It's existed since the side. Tapping into it's a little different. It is a more, it's another option that we kind of have hinted at here. But mage, with that, and its various age versions of, welcome to learning about the universe a little bit here. I'm talking about everything you can play. So, now we've gotten the big three. I'm going to be honest, once you're done with Vampire the Masquerade, Werewolf the Apocalypse, and Mage the Ascension, you are done with a lot of the World of Darkness. We've gotten most of that thing here. I've got a lot of stuff I've talked about Vampire. I could always suggest those on my YouTube side of things. You could learn a lot there, too. But, talking that's what you can play and stuff like that, hopefully it helps you here, too. So after here, these three games, there were two others that were part of the original lineup. Two more that kind of came about, plus a couple others that showed up later on. Which one do we have next here? Wraith? Wraith's a great one to talk about because one of these two to talk about. Wraith the Oblivion. So this was these one and Changeling the Dreamer are two other groups that came about that were harder to play. The thing about Wraith the Oblivion is there are some connections to it. But in and of itself, what is this? Well, you're playing a ghost. So, the entire idea is you're a spirit that has gone to one of the various versions of the afterlife. There are various versions of the afterlife that exist within the World of Darkness system. But there's these things called the Great Maelstroms. What are the Great Maelstroms? Well, they're things that happen in the afterlife that are violent storms in what's called the Shadowlands. The Shadowlands are effectively a big be-all term for the afterlife. My nose itches. If I talk about the Shadowlands, I'm talking about all the different versions of the afterlife. And what happens is there's basically storms that happen in the Shadowlands. The fourth Great Maelstrom was during the First World War and the Spanish flu. It is one of the major turning points that kind of created... there's all these historical events that basically happen, and you get out of the storm. You are freed from it. That's the easiest way to describe it. You no longer face the Oblivion. You are a Wraith player character. And I'm going to tell you right now, you are a ghost. You haunt the Shadowlands. But you're still tied to the living world, the Skinlands. So you are technically confined in the underworld, basically. But the idea is that you can interact with the living world. And I'm going to tell you here, I've barely dove into Wraith. So Wraiths are very complex, have their own system. It's a very interesting idea that you're basically a ghost that interacts and possesses things in the real world. There are different versions of them and different things, different classes of them, similar to the tribes, the clans of vampires, the tribes of werewolves, the traditions of mages, or different types of wraiths. But the basic idea is you're a ghost, you're haunting the Shadowlands. The Great Maelstroms have basically, almost in a way, awakened you. And you have unfinished business that you're messing around with the real world in. So, yeah, that's the Wraith the Oblivion. And there's a historical setting, the Great War, which is the fourth Great Maelstrom during World War I. That is the historical setting. The glow-in-the-dark cover is quick. I have the Wraith book, but I don't know if it glows in the dark. I physically have that book. I'd have to go to my shelf of tabletop, which is a little more difficult. Easier said than done, because my books are at the bottom of it. All my magic cards are things. I will show off my thing over there. Yeah, there's my book of my shelf of tabletop and nerd stuff. The bottom shelf, two things are where all my role-playing books are. And, I have the Wraith book and a bunch of vampire and werewolf books, but I think I just had the normal one rather than the glow-in-the-dark one. The glow-in-the-dark one was pretty cool, though, too. I remember seeing it back in the day. I owned the Wraith, but that was one of the ones that, just because of the complexity, I never dived into too much. But again, it's an idea that you are a spirit of the underworld. You're trying to basically influence the real world. It has, it's difficult to play, because it's two different kind of levels of stuff. But there are some related things here to the entire thing. There's the system Orpheus, which is the last original gaming. I wasn't going to really bring up Orpheus, but the Orpheus is the opposite idea and really doesn't connect up with a lot of the World of Darkness things, because what is Orpheus? Orpheus is, there's a corporation called the Orpheus Group that they've basically can project your spirit into the realm of the dead. So it's kind of its own thing, that rather than you're immortal that's going into the Shadowlands. So it loosely ties to Wraith, but also Orpheus can kind of be its own thing, because you don't really deal with any of the other supernatural stuff, because you're going into the Shadowlands and the, worlds of the dead and stuff like that. You're not in the mortal world normally. But it is a option there. And again, we have the historic, the Wraith the Great War. So I'm going to tell you, I might be missing some things when it comes to Wraiths that I can't talk about, because it's my lack of familiarity in some of these other ones here. Now, that's Wraith though. Hopefully, no. We want Changeling next. Let's do Changeling next, then Hunter, then Mummy, because that's the word. Changeling the Dreaming, with this nice cover art here, which looks like a entire thing. Well, this is where you can play Changelings. Now, the thing about Changeling the Dreaming is, and I'm going to say this because I've said it so many times, is I love Changeling the Dreaming and its opposite in Chronicles of Darkness, which is, if I can remember what it's called, Changeling Chronicles of Darkness. And Changeling Chronicles of Darkness was Changeling the Lost. Okay. Why? Oh my. Well, the entire idea is, for Changeling the Dreaming, you are the remains of the changeling that have been in the mortal world almost. You have awakened from a long slumber. You're basically almost like half-human, half-fairy creatures that exist there, that are beings that have been left behind in the mortal world while the rest of the Fae go off to Arcadia, the realm of the Fae. Changeling the Lost are mortals that were brought by the Fae into Arcadia and are trying to return to the mortal realm and have been altered by the Fae. So it's kind of like the idea of the old stories of fairies coming in and replacing your child, stealing your child away, replacing it with one of your own to raise it, and taking your child to raise it on their own. Remember, that's like a tale that's been told, and I like the idea that both versions of Changeling are opposite of each other, kind of. Very interesting. But Changeling the Dreaming is a big one, and the idea is, of course, yes, you are changelings torn between your nature as a kind of more human and Fae nature, and you're trying to maintain a balance between them. And you have this idea of the dreaming, the spark of inspiration you need to live, and that dreaming is fading. And basically, you have to deal with banality, the world that doesn't exist, that doesn't believe in Fae. So banality is almost similar to paradox for mages, except it's rather than mages, when they do magic, they get paradox. Banality is just existence for Fae. It's the world that we live in isn't a world that lives for supernatural stuff. So, yeah. It's basically, you're cut off from the area of Arcadia, which is where changelings traditionally and Fae creatures come from, and you just have to deal with this nature there. The Kith basically are the different aspects of Fae you could be. I'll just go over these briefly now just by naming them. I'm not going to go depth of them because it's like being a werewolf tribe, a vampire clan, a wraith group. Boggans, Eshu, Knockers, Puka, Redcap, Satyrs, Scythe, Sloggans, Trolls. Changeling is an interesting one. There are also the the Kithane are those ones that I've mentioned. There are other species of changeling which are beyond these, which are the basics. The Galalians, which have, I'm going to butcher these. Churichian, Gilidu, Korid, Merfolk, Morganid, Piskies, River Hags, Selkies, Swan Maidens, Witchel, Warpchingers. God. But those are all the Kith. But there are more than that. Let's talk about the other big groups. I'm not going to break down these, but there are the Adonai, the old form of Fae. So those are things that exist. There are the Sien, which are the changelings of the Middle Kingdom. AKA, we've talked about this a little bit already today, that there are stuff that's in the Asian, the beast courts and stuff like that, and the connections with the Kuai Jin. That there are Eastern supernatural creatures. Guess what? There are Eastern supernatural changelings that have their own versions of everything. Boom. The Inanime are cousins to the true Fae, which have their own groups too. I guess you could play them, maybe? I don't know. I'd have to check into them. Oh, and there is a Dark Ages Fae too. I can't remember that. Boop, boop. Dark Ages Fae. I was talking about the different ages, so there is a Dark Ages Fae book. Oh, the true phase are the inhabitants of Arcadia. So that's the other thing that lies beyond the hedge. They're the ones that you can't get access to. They're kind of connected off of. So that's what the innate are causes. The Nuhe are changelings native to North Africa. Yes, the Malkavians can communicate with some true fae, aka fairies, which are a type of true fae. So it doesn't mean that they wouldn't have good connections with changelings, but remember that changelings have been cut off from their true fae brethren and have, been stuck on Earth. So certainly true fae probably don't look at them very well. So the Nune are the changelings of North Africa. Vampire the Masquerade. But again, fairy can be catch-all for all the types of changelings and true fae in World of Darkness too. Ooh, nice! I didn't know that we had Vampire the Masquerade peanuts. Cool. So yes, so certainly, yeah. I've been told about Path of Power and the Inner Voice in Vampire the Masquerade. As a quick aside, the Path of Power and Inner Voice. It's a type of enlightenment. Basically, it's a path which replaces your humanity. They're Sabbat paths. Effectively, when you're playing a vampire character, or traditional vampire character has humanity. It's basically a measurement of how much you try to retain your human nature. But different vampires sometimes, especially the Sabbat, follow different paths. What does this mean? Is you've elected a philosophy that allows you to go beyond that entire idealism of trying to remain human. You basically, each path, like the Path of Power, Inner Voice is just one of them, has their own tenets, their own morality guideline and rationale. Humanity has a basic one, and this one under the Sabbat. And there are other paths that are non-Sabbat paths, but the Sabbat ones are the major ones you can find other than humanity most of the time, that have their own morality guidelines and rationale for what you do, and the deeper you follow into it, the more what kind of being you aim to be is. Like, Camarilla vampires usually stick with humanity because they're trying to retain a spark of that humanity. That's an interesting idea to still pick it. Okay. Must be an interesting story you're going to be told. That's the kind of thing. The Thalian are unseelie colonists of the Kethkian. And then that is most of the changelings. So yeah, it's basically the courts and houses of changelings are the groups that they kind of live under. The duality of the soul. There's the Seelie Court, which are big on the guardians of the Fey traditions. The Unseelie Court, they mock the traditions of the Seelie Court. The Shadow Court, which is a dark reflection of the Unseelie Court. And there's various 13 political houses that exist also. So these are like political organizations that are almost kind of like things like the Camarilla, the Sabbat, and Vampire and stuff like that, more or less. So you also have that as a changeling. And of course then you have arts and cantrips, which are the changeling. 13 is a common number. It's got like a supernatural connection to it. But that's changeling. Let's talk about the other two groups here that we can talk about quickly before we dive into some other random ones. Hunter the Reckoning, the Imbued. Hey, you are mortal, but sort of not. We've talked about a lot of people that, like, hunt things. The Inquisitors, the various organizations, like the kind of, like, government SCP-type group that's looking out for vampires and werewolves, and all these other things. But Hunter, well, Hunter are unique because an angel, question mark, came down and gave them information into their brains and how to fight, awaken them to the existence of things that exist outside of reality? Oh, I forgot one. Oh, let's get that book up and ready. So yeah, it's... That's not a great way of describing it. I gotta be honest. Okay. If I am playing a hunter, what the hell does that mean? Well, easy way of saying it is I'm playing someone that has... I'm just gonna put this book here in between here. Don't ignore that. It's going to show up in a minute. Don't ignore that. It's going to show up in a minute. I have encountered something supernatural, and in the midst of that supernatural thing, which, again, things like people that see werewolves or vampires or stuff, or mages, they traditionally just pass it off. As I just saw something, my eyes tricked me. Hunter can be fun. Hunter can be challenging. Hunter is an interesting idea. But I see, let's say, normally when you see a werewolf, delirium goes on, and I'm like, oh, I just saw a wolf, or I saw a bear, or something. My brain cushions it. But sometimes that doesn't happen. And I see whatever's occurring. A werewolf fighting a vampire, two werewolves at it, a spirit going up, and a mage causing magic. I see it for what it truly is. And at that point in time... Oh, I know. That's fine. I'll go ahead. I guess that's looked at as a term that is, hateful, I guess, by the auto mod. It's been a while since auto mods picked up anything in my thing here. I always thought that it could be misstrewn. It could be misstrewn in the way it's used. Gotcha. So I guess it's up to me to watch when people use that. I'll take that responsibility. Anyway, yeah. It's not like that. So the idea of, like, you've been told vampires exist isn't something. To be a hunter, you have to see it to believe it. It would be like, I come home to my family having been slaughtered by a vampire who's in front of me. And then they leave me because they're, maybe like a terrible being that, was like, ha, I'm just going to leave you alive. Wah ha 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 ha, now I leave. But you saw it. Or you run into two werewolves fighting each other in front of you. Basically, to become a hunter, you have to see it in front of your face. Why isn't the hunter one popping up? It disappeared there. Weird. There it is. Okay. You see it to believe it in front of you. It is something that you cannot avoid. It is just hits you in the face, basically. So yeah. It's awful. But something then, in the point where you would break, something awakens. And the way that hunters form, what type of hunter you are, depends on what you encountered, basically. How you were imbued. What kind of event it was determines the type of hunter you are. There are basically different creeds that exist. And the different creeds have a different kind of idea. There's zeal, vision, mercy. Mercy is the idea that these things are also suffering and I should put them out of their misery. That's like the vampire is like, it's been corrupted, I should put it out of its misery. The visionaries, kind of like look to the vision people, kind of see things and kind of are more communications. Zeal are more just extermination. Mercy can also like see them as redeeming themselves. There are redeemers under the group. But basically, the Waywards and Hermits are lost. Visionary creeds, they're technically lost. There's rules for playing them. You play one of the 9 creeds. And then there's also bystanders. And But bystanders are people that went through the same process as the imbued but did not answer the call. Basically, they could have gotten the willing to act but didn't. Basically, what happens is during that event that makes you become a hunter, you get this call to become a hunter. And if you accept it, you are imbued with power to fight against the supernatural. To fight against vampires, werewolves, mages, whatever you're encountering. And then, yes, you've got bystanders. You could probably play bystanders. Yeah. So bystanders know things exist, but can't really do about a bunch of it. But some of them do help other hunters, basically. So bystanders still could be useful. It's like they didn't take up the arms. They don't have the powers, because a lot of these people have abilities to help them fight things. They have a conviction and edges. Edges are supernatural abilities they gained from this imbuing. They're mortals that have gained these specifically supernatural ability to fight them. And whatever they're imbued by, like, it's hard to tell what they're imbued by. Like, a lot of hunters call it, like, you know, angels, God, supernatural things. You can play bystander, probably. You know, it would be like you are honestly just a mortal. You're a mortal that knows about supernatural things, but because the way that you didn't take the call of a hunter, you'd probably be working with hunters. You'd be someone that would work with hunters. You don't have the edges. It would be an interesting idea that you might have skills or resources and you'd be able to invest them in different places that might make you very useful to hunters, but you're probably not as useful in the all-out battle against supernatural creatures. So it's not like you couldn't play a bystander. It'd be an interesting idea. That'd probably be the main unusual thing that you could play in Hunter that would be different. So, yeah. What other things could you play? That's a good question. I'm just thinking if there's anything else related to Hunter. Yeah, someone who spies and doesn't fight for them. Certainly, that is something you could play. And it would probably be pretty fun to play. Is it... It would be a different experience, I think is what to talk about it. It would be a very different experience than playing as a hunter. Bad? No. I think it could still be fun. But there are certainly things like being imbued limits what you can do by a lot. So you have to be ready for that limiting effect that you're going to have. You're not going to have as much of an option. Still, you can play something interesting. Alright. But that's basically Hunter. They're the different groups that you could have are there. As I said, there's the 9 different creeds you could choose from with their 3 different sources. It's not like the Lost Creeds couldn't be played. It's just they're not a normal one. It's a very out there one. So, anyway, we can talk about... let's talk about bygones for a minute before I move on to the next one here for a second, because bygones are something that we can talk about because they're not something you could really play. Because remember, consensus is very important in World of Darkness. It is a funny word that basically means it's used by mage, but basically it's the level of supernatural stuff that the world allows. There's a little bit of consensus on the edges and things like that, but there's some very powerful creatures which can't exist. Like dragons. Consensus has made dragons not be able to exist. Unicorns, yetis, other various things. There's plenty of things that consensus is just like, you know what? No. no, we're not going to allow that. So it's another reason that Mokale can become dragons is because they've got that connection. So yeah. I was waiting for a little bit for this one because it's a little bit of an odd one out there. But we can talk about good old Demon the Fallen. You want to play a demon? Yes. Demon the Fallen. Oh boy. So, you play the Fallen. Basically, angels that have been consigned to the abyss for loving humanity too much. That's an easy way of saying it. Now, there are the Elohim, which are basically greater spirits that serve... I had an entire cosmology episode of this that I did a couple of weeks back. If you want to deal with that, yeah, you're paranormal. I don't ask, but, if you want to kind of dive into Elohim, demons, and stuff like that, it's a thing you can do. Yeah. God may or may not exist in the form it may exist is, depends on what kind of being you are. Vampires might talk about God as an actual god. Certainly werewolves look at it as being just another powerful spirit, similar to Gaia and the Triad. Mages look at it as being also a powerful spirit that influences the world, but some of them actually have religious beasts. I turned on my fan if you're hearing that noise. So there's a lot to that entire thing that I'm kind of going in. It's kind of a hard thing to define in a way. I'm not going to get into it right now, but I did have an entire thing I talked about for an hour about the cosmology of the world of darkness, and Vampire the Masquerade and everything, which is it's a deep dive. Getting into the cosmology part of this entire thing is very difficult to do. But think of demons as this way. They're powerful spirits, and whatever being which we called God to them, they served it. And Lucifer sided with humans, basically, or humanity, and fell into the abyss. The abyss being part of the Shadowlands, but is like the dark, terrible, horrible place, the Shadowlands. Hey, guess what? If you're playing a Lasombra in Vampire the Masquerade, your shadow magic comes from the abyss. Tenebration is messing around with abyssal powers. That's where the shadows of the they come from. So, yeah. Yep. Anyway, so basically these are kind of like the angelic demonic things. The lore of 5th edition does a pretty good job of connecting a lot of things, but there are some issues still that do exist when talking about the lore of it, which we'll talk about a little bit today. So, Demon. The idea is the 6th Great Maelstrom, the big event that happened, basically created cracks in the walls and allowed the Fallen to escape. And when you are playing a member of the Fallen, you remember your existence. Basically, you've possessed a mortal. So you have the mortal's memories. But a lot of times this doesn't have an effect. The mortal's memories into the Fallen doesn't have an effect. It doesn't matter. What happens when you're playing a Fallen in Demon the Fallen is, it's the rare time that the humanity of your host, love, courage, ambition, curiosity, even rage sometimes, has shocked you out of your torment, and you remember being an angel. Or an angelic being at very least. So this human emotions of your host basically are your bulwark against your torment. And shifting to your memories outside of the abyss. And you basically regain some of your insanity. So you are a minority. You have a second chance because of the memories of this mortal host that you have. But the thing is, you're also a demon possessing a mortal, but you're also it's like this catch-22 of like, oh shit, I remember my time being this really good creature outside of here, but now I'm also like possessing this being and kind of taking over it. So there's 7 houses in the Fallen. You're different factions in the Fallen. Yeah. I'm gonna blow my nose here. Mute it. As I blow my nose. So yeah, what are your antagonists? The groups you fight against. Demon Hunters, which are very similar to Vampire Hunters. Which I'm sure you could play a group of Demon Hunters if you really wanted to. And the one thing you can't play is the Earthbound Demons. Basically, remember, 6th Great Maelstrom freed a whole bunch of the Fallen. There are those that were also freed, plus there have always been other demons there that honestly probably don't like you. You're like, hey now. There's also other just demons which are different. The Fallen are one group of demons. There are demons that aren't Fallen. So there's a lot to this entire thing here, but there's a lot of themes here. You know, regaining a little bit of a semblance of things here. But Demon of the Fallen's an interesting idea. It is certainly... I hate this time of year. It's a little cold, a little hot. Certainly interesting to play. But Demon of the Fallen. There's one final one to talk about now. Before we get into some, I would call them randoms on things you could possibly play. Mummy the Resurrection. So, what is this? You are playing an Amenti, an ancient mummy reborn in the modern world. Yeah, mixed humans. So the demons are basically risen demons. You've been freed from the abyss, which is effectively World of Darkness, hell to a degree. It's part of the Shadowlands, the world of the land of the dead. It's this very terrible, dark, evil place. The abyss, things deal with the abyss in various ways. Anyway, you've been freed from your torment, being trapped in it for all eternity, and by chance, you are fallen. But you, in a way, yes. And the thing is, the mortal that you possessed when you came into the mortal world, because all of them did that, basically gave you back a semblance of your former angelic / high spirit ways before you fell into the abyss and were driven mad. So it's an interesting concept. You are trying to rise farther, though, than what you already are. So, yes. You're playing the Undying, is another term for it. The Mummy. The Reborn. Your immortals whose bodies have been ritualistically preserved and granted power of self-resurrection. So very Rise Mummy from the Thing. It's basically... Oh, thank you for the follow. Forgot my speakers were on, and so people probably heard that double. Should have had my headphones plugged in so it wouldn't pop up there. So, like, Egyptian mummies are the most well-known mummies in World of Darkness. Of course, because, you know, hey, we all think of the Egyptian mummies. There are other versions of mummies from across the world, and different versions of them, so it's not like a only thing. There's mummies from China, from South America, other places in the world. The thing is, you are kind of resurrecting yourself, so mummies actually don't look like they were when they were preserved a lot of ways. So there's 3 groups: the Amenti, the Wutai, the Cappadocia, and they have their dynasties, which are the different groups of them. just trying to like describe this in an easy way to understand it here. So the idea is you self-resurrect, and that self-resurrection causes you to kind of come back to life. So you don't look like the bandaged up, falling apart thing anymore. It's sort of like you pull a Brendan Fraser mummy with the Imhotep, except you don't have to consume people's bodies to do that, you know? So basically you start out as that, and then you've kind of resurrected to looking like he's a dude again with his powers. Yeah, the Cappadocia, very similar to the South America one. So it's basically the spell of life was kind of originated in Egypt. They serve the forces of balance, Matat, their divine patrons. You get into the story of it very much more, and the entire idea of the mummies and the different groups of them. And they're independent mummies and from different groups. And certainly, you know, it doesn't mean you can't look all rotty and stuff, but they have the ability to kind of be there. So, yeah. Original books dealt mostly with the Egyptian ones. The other books in the Mummy, the Resurrection series, brought in other various areas and other cultures and stuff. Because mummification has been very cultural throughout an area, throughout the world, and the idea of reincarnation, resurrection, and undying can be kind of global themselves. So yeah. There's a lot to do with that. But again, there's another book that I didn't dive into a lot with my time during the World of Darkness, during the original time period with it. So this is one that I would like to honestly look at more, and certainly being mummies from different areas. It's just unfortunate that I don't think there's a huge amount in this line of books. Just similar to Demon, Changeling, Hunter, Mummy, didn't get a lot to them, unfortunately, because, well, the big three are most popular. Some of them got more books. Yeah, like Changeling had a little bit more popularity. Wraith had some. Demon... Hunter had a little bit too. Hunter had his video games based off of it. But like Demon and Mummy just didn't get a lot of popularity. So, unfortunate. It just ended up being that way for them, which it's both unfortunate and interesting, because it meant that there was certainly different ways to play that we probably could have gotten ideas that were in there that you could have played. Alright, there's a few more kind of side categories of these things that we can kind of talk about a little bit here. Let's see here. I'm just going to look through my list of things here that I have, that see if I can find something that's interesting to talk about. You know, ones that you can play, because there's certainly a lot of abilities like that exist. There are other things related to stuff that you fight with mummies and stuff, and the things you go against are the things. Yeah, they tried for more experimental things, and the different rule sets were harder to mess around with, unfortunately. It is sad to, like, say that, like, you couldn't find a lot of that stuff. Oh, hey, here's one. Oh, boy. You can play Arisen. Yeah. So, what is Arisen? I forgot about this one when we talked about Wraith. It's a wraith that's managed to return to your body in the Skinlands. You're not a zombie. You basically possess your own body back in the Skinlands. You look mostly human. It's not like a Walking Dead thing, fortunately. You kind of like keep your body together, but it's a different way of playing. I think is an interesting one. The Risen. I forgot about that one. Missed it there. There are other possessed, other than of course what we talked about for demons or Fomori. Drones, which are servants of the Weaver. Fomori are servants of the Worm. They've been possessed by. I talked about like the ones there. Drones and Gorgon and Kami are also possessed ones. So those are other versions of things. So like the Fomori, certainly I talked about them and there's books for them. But you could also be a drone, a Gorgon, or a Kami for another possessed type of thing, and it will be very different. And then of course the demon and the Amenti have possession process. The Amenti also possessing their own body in a way. You know, it's sort of like I possess my body after it leaves it. You know, all the players guys are really cool for some of these different ones too. Definitely. I think that. Probably could play for the mortal ones if you want to go for. In the demon, you could play a Nephilim, an offspring of a demon and a human. Demons and human women. So you could probably play Nephilim. I'm sure there's some kind of there might not be too many rules for it, but probably something in the House of the Fallen. You're playing something a little different than a demon, but Nephilims are probably in existence that you could choose out there. I think that's it then. I think I've hit on the major ones. The Jinhai and Wanxian, which were a little different things than the Kindred of the East stuff, the Kuaishin. There might be some playing of both of those groups. You'd have to look into it. And just to mention it, because it does actually exist, kind of like it. Enjoy the Vujuka. Strange eyeless humanoids who live far beneath the Earth's surface. But they apparently serve the interests of the worm. They are things. I don't think you can play them, but maybe you could. Weird eyeless horrors. Let's just show this off here as we're finishing those up. There you go. Play one of those things. I don't know how you would. Pretty awful. They're another creature. I'm sure somewhere someone has made rules to play one of those. Oh, I have to readjust the camera a little bit. Yeah, picked it up. Boop, 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 boop. Cool. I think that's about it. I think we finished up our conversation for today. It's a pretty good one, pretty long one. There was technically a little bit more that I was like, I thought there might have been a little bit more, but I think that hits up most of the major things you could play in World of Darkness. So, like, there's a lot of stuff out there in World of Darkness. And technically speaking, everything I talked about is connected together. Technically. The issue comes down to compatibility isn't always the same. Yes, they're all using the storyteller system, which is the dice rolling system that they use. The rules are very similar. But as someone that has looked at the differences between some of these before, they aren't 100% compatible. There are little differences, and you'd have to use the best versions of them. The problem being for things like if you're using Demon or Mummy or Hunter even, they don't have newer editions of them. I personally prefer the 20th anniversary editions when it comes to World of Darkness, but I've always talked about the 5th edition has versions of gameplay for like something like Vampire the Masquerade and what they're coming out with Hunter and Werewolf in the new editions. Those would be fine if it's your style of play that you want. I don't like some of the stuff they did in 5th edition Vampire. That's why I prefer V20. But certainly, for someone's style of play, 5th edition might be better. In comparison, 5th edition, for this sake of explaining that there, 5th edition Vampire focuses a lot more on having problems when it comes to things like feeding and stuff, and using blood and frenzy. There's a lot more of these frenzy die checks that exist in 5th edition that are triggered especially by using your powers. That was something that didn't exist in earlier editions. So there is this entire thing of you have a chance of... It focuses more on the you versus the inner beast part of Vampire the Masquerade, which existed. But Vampire the Masquerade was a combination of the earlier editions, a combination of that, and politics. Vampire the Masquerade is a very politics-heavy system, where you're dealing with not only the beast inside you, but the beast of the politics around you. It's sort of like this double-edged kind of thing. I personally prefer the politics more, and the focus that's been brought more on the fighting against the inner beast isn't bad for storytelling, but it's not the Vampire the Masquerade I like. And that's why I talk about I like V20 more, because it doesn't have that focus. So, and also there's some things in the V20 storyline I don't like. Like, I honestly think that the Second Inquisition isn't a bad idea. I think they take it to a much more extreme than that it actually makes sense storyline-wise. So see, like, the 100 Eye system, I'm not a fan of it, but I understand some people could like it more. Again, that's a thing. Everybody has their own likes and dislikes when it comes to these systems here, and that's a fine thing. The revised edition would be the one before V20. So V20, which I like to talk about, is basically a revised version of the revised edition, is the easiest way of saying it. It's pretty similar to about it. There isn't a huge amount of changes between V20 and that. So, like, but it's the basic system of roll some dice, combine an attribute. I think it updates some of the problems. Like, again, it's very close to it. Do I still have that book set open? World Darkness by that. So yeah, Storyteller System, that was not where it was under. Storyteller System, that's where it was under. Yeah, it was, so you're probably playing the revised Storyteller Edition system. So, the revised edition, which is technically the 3rd edition you're probably playing. It's just that this 20th anniversary came out after White Wolf stopped publishing, and it was... my brain just is breaking a little bit today. So forgive that there. It happens. It is Onyx Path, which took over and did the 20th anniversary stuff. They use the revised framework. So if you're doing revised, it's pretty similar. The revised edition 20th anniversary is very close to each other. You know, it's just like the 20th anniversary did a few little things from the revised, and again, it's like, honestly, 7 years after the publications kind of ended. That was when the 20th anniversary started coming about. So it's a pretty big time gap between things. It's basically the idea of the 20th anniversary is invoking the feel of the 2nd edition while retaining the design sensibilities of the revised edition. Was that thing there. So, yeah. Anyway, there's a lot you can play. Are they all compatible? Hell no. And honestly, like, I wouldn't want to play a ghoul, necessarily, with a group of vampires. Unless I want to have a challenge. Would it be fun? Possibly. Would I have a great idea? Maybe. Would I be at a disadvantage in every aspect of everything? Probably. A ghoul character is inherently weaker than a vampire character. Mages and vampires don't always compare together. Werewolves and vampires definitely don't compare together. Werewolves are just powerhouses. They have really huge stats. Are all these systems compatible? Yes. Can you play a lot of these things? Sure. It might come down to, what is your storyteller running? What options might work with what your storytellers were running? And would it be fun? Certainly playing a mortal game with a whole bunch of different types of mortals. I could have one kinfolk, one who uses psychic powers, one who's a hedge mage, and a group of mortals might be really fun to play. Or maybe one that's the bystander, too, knows about other things. Ghouls are just less powerful. It's not just a big deal. It's just less powerful in general. Not being able to make ghouls, it's just a lot of flavor. You might not make ghouls during your gameplay. It's an option. It's if you want that option or to get rid of that option, that's the only thing. Remember, a ghoul, which I talked about playing, is a mortal that has had vampire blood given to them. Normally, to make a vampire, what do? Drain all the blood and then put vampire blood into them. So basically, it's like, I drink all of your blood, put some of my blood into you then. That makes you into a vampire. Maybe. It's not always successful. It's not 100% successful, and it's not always it's always kind of terrible. Becoming a vampire is a very awful thing, honestly. Might be better just to die sometimes. The embrace is not pleasant. But for ghouls, they still got their blood in them, and then they get vampire blood in them. So you go over, and the thing is, you can ghoul animals and stuff too. I had a player who had a ghouled alligator, and a ghouled rat. So that was very fun. Which then he gives his blood to a rat. He basically did that, and then the rat became a ghoul, and then the rat became hyper intelligent, because when it became a ghoul, it gained smarts. It couldn't speak. It's a rat, but it gained like an intelligence of like 3, which is average human intelligence. Yes and no. They can be, because they need vampire blood to survive. And there is a thing called blood bond, which if they drink from you 3 times, they basically are in love with you. Which is basically, it's almost like they're addicted to you. But not all ghouls get that. The blood bond is very powerful. It is a thing. It is basically infatuation with you. But they need vampire blood to survive. They can break the blood bond, and they can go to other vampires to get blood. And honestly, if they haven't been ghoul for very long, they can change back. The idea is, as long as you are within normal human age, you're fine. As soon as you get to be a 100 or 200-year-old ghoul, then yes, you need vampire blood to survive. Because if not, when you turn back to mortal, you just die. You're 200 years old. But if I'm 40 years old and turn back to mortal, hey, I might age to my normal age that I should be rapidly. But then I'm just immortal then. So it is sort of, but yes, but no. There is the addiction which they become a slave to. You're not psychologically, and it's the psychological and physical addictions that you're basically creating in them. The psychological being from the blood bond, the physical being to the blood. And the rush and the power and the youth it gives them and the abilities it gives them. Yeah. You want to be a vampire without being a vampire? Be a ghoul. It's addicting. And virtual immortality with being able to go out in the sun and all that kind of stuff. Anyway. I'm going to end it for YouTube here. Those of you who are hanging around on Twitch, hang around on a little bit as I give my outro for when I put this up on YouTube. Thank you for joining. I hope you learned all about these things. We did a little bit of talking about some questions and stuff. And honestly, anybody that wants to throw questions like that out in the description of YouTube videos or join me live and talk about it, great. I'm always willing to answer questions, especially about the topic we're talking about. Hope you learned a lot of different things you play. Anyway, for you, in general, farewell out there.